Hey guys, welcome to my dad's man cave. It's a little bit messy at the moment, but I'm sure most people can relate to man caves being very messy almost all the time. In this video, I'm going to show you exactly how to drill a spear, whether that's a stainless steel spear, a carbon steel spear, put a flopper on there, pin the flopper on properly, tune it correctly so you don't lose fish so it locks open, and even how to put 2 floppers on the one spear if you're chasing after really, really big fish. The first thing that makes this process a lot easier is having a spear drilling jig. It's not essential, but I tell you what, it makes it much easier. This is just a piece of square mild steel that I turned on a metal lathe when I was in high school, I think actually. It's got an 8mm hole down the middle here, and then there's holes lined up on the top so that your drill bit goes down and will drill through the center of the spear. So the first thing to talk about is the position of the flopper hole from the tip of the spear. So I tend to make the hole the same length from the tip as the flopper. If you have the flopper too close to the end like this, you've seen some spears like this, it's really easy when that goes through a fish to hook out on this end bit because it's not very sharp, so it can turn back on itself. So I like to have a lot of distance between the tip and the flopper, so you've got a decent bit of meat from here to here so that it holds onto the fish better. So if we're going to be doing another hole for a double flopper, obviously you want that to sit behind this one. So we'll mark that out here, that we want that hole just about 1 centimeter past the end of that flopper. So we've got a little bit of clearance for them to go. You don't want them fouling on each other. The other thing that's important is to make sure your floppers are down and upwards respectively. There's nothing worse than trying to shoot a gun when the flopper comes out to the side like this or on like a 40-degree angle. It just puts you off, and it may just be something mental in my head, but I could never hit a fish with a flopper that's coming out the side like that. So this is the jig here. This is the hole I'm going to use to drill the flopper hole, and I want the hole on this mark that I've made here. So I'll take that mark, line it up there, and then draw a mark here at the back of the jig. So when I insert it in, I know that it's in the right spot. All the way in, so I know that's where I want it. And I'll loosely tighten this grub screw, and then we'll adjust the rotation of the spear to make sure that it's going through at the right level. So this flat section of the spear here, you want this vertical to be parallel with the way that the drill bit is coming down. So I tend to just eyeball this up and down until I'm happy that that is going to be parallel straight down from the drill bit through the spear. Make sure that your mark is still lined up at the back of the jig, and then we can tighten this off and get ready for the drilling process. Before you start drilling, make sure that your bit is lined up pretty well perfect in that hole. You don't want it to bend left or right or flex or anything like that when you're drilling. You want it to go in nice and easy so that it doesn't snap, because they're only 2.5mm carbide bits. Carbide is very tough, but it's also very, very brittle and fragile. So at 2.5mm, these things are really easy to snap, and if it gets stuck in the spear, it's a real ball ache to get it out. So make sure that you line it up properly, be patient, make sure that you use little steps, clear the swarf, little steps, clear the swarf out there. If you get your flutes of the drill bit full of swarf and then it binds, it's gonna snap, and then you're gonna have a real hard time getting out of that jig, and you'll probably ruin your jig at the same time. Not that I've ruined any jigs before. And one last thing, glasses, because if something does happen, you don't want it in your eyes. So as you can see guys, that was really easy to do. You just have to be a little bit patient and take little bits at a time as you go. Make sure you clear the flutes, and you can feel it working and biting through, but that's punched through really nicely, really clean hole. You might be asking why I don't use cutting compound. With carbide, you don't particularly need it, and if you use cutting compound on this, it will clog up the flutes because it's going through a jig, and then it'll inevitably snap your bit. So it works fine without it. I like to use a high speed on the drill press. That's what a machinist friend told me to use when cutting through high speed steel like this. That's all there is to the drilling process. So if you don't have access to one of these jigs, or you don't have the energy to make one, or the equipment, not everyone's got a metal lathe at their disposal, you can use it in this vise like this, but it's a bit more difficult to start it off. I suggest that you file a small little flat patch on the spear where you want to start the hole, get it lined up, and then just nibble at it. It might be a bit difficult to start it off, but once you start it with these carbide bits, they really will just mow through it. Try and insert it as far up into the chuck as you can so that you've got the least amount sticking out so that it doesn't wobble as much. Once you're through, It's really easy to drill through these things. It's a bit faster without a jig because the swarf clears a lot quicker because it's not going through the hole in the jig, but it's obviously not as precise, and you do run the risk of snapping the bit a little bit more or drilling your hole slightly off center, which isn't often a problem, but just be aware that it's not going to be as precise as with a jig. But I've done it without a jig many a time, just like this, and I'd be happy to use that. It's not a problem at all. Floppers are one thing that people don't really pay enough attention to, I've found, because at the end of the day, this is what's holding your fish to your spear and keeping it from getting off. Pretty important little piece of kit. So first thing about putting a flopper onto a spear is make sure that it is the right size for the spear. So this here is an 8mm spear, and this flopper here is designed for a 7.5mm spear. It kind of fits on, but not quite. So when you line the holes up, it sort of sticks out like this. That's going to affect accuracy. You want to make sure that you have the right spear and the right flopper combination. So this one here, this is made for an 8mm spear. It fits perfectly and slides up against it. You can hear that tinking sound, which means there's no resistance. This is a 7.5mm flopper. See how you can hear it squeezing. It's just not as crisp and tucked in there as well as the 8mm flopper that it's designed for. 7.5mm spear. See, that same flopper that didn't go on that 8mm spear, designed for this spear, fits on perfect. You can hear that really nice tinking sound. So be sure you get the right flopper for the right spear. So I've got this 7.5mm spear. This is the one that I drilled freehand without the jig. And I'm gonna put 2 floppers on this. Show you how to do that right now. On the note of floppers now, there's a few things that I look out for when I'm getting an aftermarket flopper for a spear, is that this inside edge here is rounded and doesn't have sharp edges. This particular flopper here has a really sharp, hard, laser cut edge here. When this is rubbing on fish and they're taking off, particularly soft fish like Spanish mackerel or wahoo, this will actually cut the flesh and you risk losing the fish. Also, on the front leading edge of the floppers, you can see that this here is same laser cut there. When that goes into a fish for penetration, it doesn't go in as smoothly as one that is slightly chamfered around the front edge like this one here. This is quite a nice flopper. I don't know who makes this one. This is a blank one here, but it's rounded on the inside edges here, so it's not going to cut the fish here. And something I like to do is on the tips of them, I like to put a little V onto my floppers like this, and then I get a file up on the back side of it like this and make a little bit of a spike. So even if it goes and pulls back through the fish and it's shut, it's got a much higher chance of hooking into the skin rather than the flat flopper, which is just like a bit of a spoon on the end like this. It's a bit nitpicky, but it's just something that I like to do, and I've not had too many troubles using it. I've sometimes lost fish with having the round parts on the end, but yeah, I really like the underside, make it into a little bit of a point. I think I learned that from Ian Puckeridge. Thanks, Ian. So the next part of this is to get the flopper onto the shaft, and that we use a thing called a flopper pin. And this is a just under 2.5mm piece of high tensile stainless steel. Now you can go buy flopper pins, or you can buy a little snap clip that goes on the front of your gun, and most of the time they are about 2.41mm, and you can cut those up, grind the edges flush, flat, and they will serve as brilliant flopper pins, which is what I'm using here. So we've got it set here like this. You'll see that it protrudes about 1.5mm out of either side. That's perfectly fine. The idea here is to lightly mushroom those with a hammer. One of the best things to do this on is a piece of railway track. And we use a small hammer, really light motions, just to mushroom off the edges a bit. Just gentle taps, you don't want to rush it or bend the pin. Then flip it over. Work it round in a circular motion all around it to get it a nice flat mushroom. That's looking pretty spot on. So that's what we're trying to achieve as a final result. Now that we've got the flopper on the spear, there's a few things wrong with this. One, it doesn't sit flush on the top here like this. You want this to sit nice and flat, otherwise that's going to affect accuracy really badly. And the other thing is, it doesn't really stick open. So an ideal flopper, when it goes through a fish, locks open and shouldn't return. This is kind of doing it at the moment. So the thing about floppers is they take a little bit of getting used to getting your head around how they work. So the reason why this isn't sitting flat is because this part here, I'm gonna call that the horseshoe section of it, right there, is impinging on the spear. So we need to tap on either side here to try and raise that up so that it sits flat. And then once that's done, I'll show you how to make it lock open. So if we're not having any luck getting this to sit flat, the last thing we can do is get a small flathead screwdriver under here, poke it out under the flopper like that, give it a bit of a squeeze, work it around to the left and to the right, squeeze it out just so it opens that horseshoe section up a bit, and now you can hear this beautiful hard metallic shutting sound of the flopper. That's exactly where we want it. You can see that it's sitting perfectly flat against the spear. Only a few more adjustments left. That's what you're after. You sort of want it to sit down like this, free flowing, then goes through a fish and locks on like that. Now the reason this locks on is because the piece here, this little part of the flopper, when this opens, it moves down and slides against the spear to lock. Never, ever, ever try and use pliers to try and pinch it. You'll see some guys trying to pinch the spears like this. It just never works out well. Always do it with a hammer and just below the pin. That's the pin there. You want to hit just below the pin with a little hammer and try and put a little dimple in it there. So when it opens, it slides. You can see there, just as it gets the resistance, it's getting it there. Now this is probably a little bit stiff for my liking. I don't want it to take that much to lock on. So this is the only time you should use pliers on a spear. Open it up like this. Then you can bend it out slightly on both sides. So that's freed it up a little bit. Now we'll get to the finer adjustments in there. Fix this right up. There's the sweet spot. I like to use the corner of the hammer. There. Both sides. Beautiful. Locks on. Won't lose a fish that way. So you might be thinking, why am I so retentive about the way my floppers work? Well, here's one pretty crappy spear off the shelf. It flops open willy-nilly. It kind of sticks a little bit. So the reason why I'm so retentive about this is when I was 19 years old, I shot a really decent sized wahoo off Moreton Island. It was about 20 kilos. I played it out for about 20 minutes and it was under me. It was on the flopper like this and I was just below me and I was gonna go down and grab it by the tail. And as I went down, I didn't keep tension on my rig line and consequently I let go of it and it all just sunk and the water pressure closed the flopper like that. And as I got closer, the wahoo came to life and as my flopper and spear was sinking down, it just swam right off the end. So having a flopper that flops like this, it's no good. And after that day, I decided that I was never gonna let floppers get in the way of me landing fish. So I'm always really, really careful about how they're tuned and making sure that they're tuned correctly. And hopefully some of these tips today can help you land more fish and keep more fish on your spears, because at the end of the day, we all want to take more fish home and injure less of them. So this is the final spear here that I've put the double floppers on. If you want to chase after big fish, this is a really good option. It's really popular at the moment. Floppers stick open, they make a nice metallic slapping sound onto the spear, which means they're tuned really nicely. They're a bit loose on the bottom, which is what we want, and then they lock open like so. The final test I like to do once it's inside the gun, get your gun, bang it in the middle of the barrel like this, and the flopper should stick right open. Just like that. If you like this video, guys, give it a thumbs up if you got something out of it, subscribe if you're not already, and I'll see you on the next one. So learning to tune floppers can be a little bit of a time-consuming process, and it's a bit fiddly and you have to work back and forth, but eventually you'll get a feel for how they work, and it's really quite simple, and it will save you a lot of fish, so it's really worth putting the time into this to learning how to make it stick open at the right time.